In section 36 of Counsels and Maxims, Schopenhauer discusses politeness. And if you expect that he will tell us that politeness is a kind of insincere social institution designed to conceal from us the true horror and unpleasantness of our social life together, but that it's nevertheless useful for this purpose and therefore should be practiced by everyone, you'd be exactly correct. Here's what he writes. Politeness, which the Chinese hold to be a cardinal virtue, is based upon two considerations of policy. I have explained one of these considerations in my Ethics. Footnote. Translator's footnote. In the passage referred to in the Grundlage der Moral, Schopenhauer explains politeness as a conventional and systematic attempt to mask the egoism of human nature in the small affairs of life. An egoism so repulsive that some such device is necessary for the purpose of concealing its ugliness. The relation which politeness bears to the true love of one's neighbor is analogous to that existing between justice as an affair of legality and justice as the real integrity of the heart. So, first consideration of policy just included here by reference that recommends politeness is that human nature is so truly awful that politeness is a kind of mask that we wear to ourselves to conceal the ugliness of our own selfishness and egoism, to allow us to still function without drawing attention to it within our own minds. We'll get to the second consideration in a moment. Since we got interrupted by that footnote, I'm going to go back to the start of the section. So section 36 again from the top. Politeness, which the Chinese hold to be a cardinal virtue, is based upon two considerations of policy. I have explained one of these considerations in my Ethics. The other is as follows. Politeness is a tacit agreement that people's miserable defects, whether moral or intellectual, shall on either side be ignored and not made the subject of reproach. And since these defects are thus rendered somewhat less obtrusive, the result is mutually advantageous. So, second policy reason for being polite is that it amounts to a kind of truce between each of us in society. I agree not to call attention to your defects and reproach you for them, and you do the same with me. And while each of us is still just as defective as before, we're no longer calling attention to these defects. It becomes easier for us to ignore them or to transact business between us without regard for them. So it amounts to a kind of a conspiracy, sort of a public conspiracy to ignore the worst elements of each other's character and moral being. Schopenhauer continues. It is a wise thing to be polite. Consequently, it is a stupid thing to be rude. To make enemies by unnecessary and willful incivility is just as insane a proceeding as to set your house on fire. That's a very pungent metaphor. For politeness is like a counter, an avowedly false coin with which it is foolish to be stingy. A sensible man will be generous in the use of it. It is customary in every country to end a letter with the words, your most obedient servant, votre très humble serviteur, suo devotissimo servo. The Germans are the only people who suppress the word servant, Diener, because of course it is not true. However, to carry politeness to such an extent as to damage your prospects is like giving money where only counters are expected. So here Schopenhauer has compared the politeness, the sort of small acts and vocabulary of polite speech and behavior, to a kind of false coin. You've inherited a bunch of counterfeit money. Well, why not spread it around? It would be ridiculous to be stingy, to try to hoard it. It's valueless in itself. Politeness and the small acts of politeness are just like that. For a person to withhold them and not to make free use of them where they're expected and useful is, as he says at the beginning of this paragraph, like setting your own house on fire. It's ridiculous. It's stupid to be rude when you are harmed by rudeness. One doesn't want to be excessive with politeness to damage one's own prospects, but this is the nature of politeness and its utility for us. Schopenhauer goes on. Wax, a substance naturally hard and brittle, can be made soft by the application of a little warmth, so that it will take any shape you please. In the same way, by being polite and friendly, you can make people pliable and obliging, even though they are apt to be crabbed and malevolent. Hence politeness is to human nature what warmth is to wax. Of course, it is no easy matter to be polite, insofar, I mean, as it requires us to show great respect for everybody, whereas most people deserve none at all. And again, insofar as it demands that we should feign the most lively interest in people when we must be very glad that we have nothing to do with them. To combine politeness with pride is a masterpiece of wisdom. And so it seems there's a difficulty about being polite, is that you have to treat people with politeness who plainly don't deserve it. You have to continue to associate with people who are not worth associating with. You must pretend to be pleased to be in their presence when in reality you find them utterly repulsive, Schopenhauer seems to suggest here. So to be both proud and polite is something of an achievement, perhaps an ambition for a certain kind of misanthrope like Schopenhauer. Continuing. We should be much less ready to lose our temper over an insult, which, in the strict sense of the word, means that we have not been treated with respect, if on the one hand we had not such an exaggerated estimate of our value and dignity. That is to say, if we were not so immensely proud of ourselves. And on the other hand, if we had arrived at any clear notion of the judgment which, in his heart, one man generally passes upon another. So I take this long sentence to mean that we would disregard insults directed at our person if either we had overcome our own exaggerated self-estimation and realized our own worth perhaps lower than we pretend it is, or if we understood what people generally think of each other deep in their hearts, we would perhaps no longer expect that people would not insult us. Continuing with Schopenhauer now. If most people resent the slightest hint that any blame attaches to them, you may imagine their feelings if they were to overhear what their acquaintances say about them. You should never lose sight of the fact that ordinary politeness is only a grinning mask. If it shifts its place a little, or is removed for a moment, there is no use raising a hue and a cry. When a man is downright rude, it is as though he has taken off all his clothes, and stood before you in puris naturalibus. Like most men in this condition, he does not present a very attractive appearance. It's the end of the section. A bit of a shocking image. To be deliberately rude. He says we should not mind if the mask of politeness slips sometime, not worth getting terribly upset about, because it merely shows the ugliness that politeness is meant to conceal. And the idea, first, the deliberately rude man is like a man who has set his own house on fire, and then here, perhaps even more absurdly, like a man who is completely stripped naked and stands in front of us. He's not improved his appearance or our estimation of him by doing so. And so, as Schopenhauer has said at the beginning of this section, it's a stupid thing to be rude if that damages your social prospects. So that's advice to keep in mind, both the true place of politeness in respect of human nature and the ugliness of human nature, and the advisability and utility of being polite. There's generally no advantage to be gained by being deliberately rude, so don't do it. So that's the end of section 36 of Counsels and Maxims. We'll take a look at section 37 in the next video. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.